There is a place on Earth where the global economy becomes visible as a line of moving lights on dark water. Tankers enter before sunrise, their steel hulls heavy with crude oil, condensate, liquefied gas, and the invisible expectations of nations thousands of kilometers away. The place is not wide. It is not beautiful in the ordinary postcard sense. It is a narrow sea between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, a compressed corridor where geography holds the modern world by the throat. This is the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest navigable reality, the passage is small enough to feel almost impossible when compared with the scale of what depends on it. Ships move through designated lanes, separated by only a few kilometers of water, while mountains rise on one side and desert coasts stretch on the other. Each vessel may look alone from the air, but together they form a bloodstream. Energy moves through this channel toward refineries, factories, airports, ports, homes, and data centers across Asia, Europe, and beyond. The Strait of Hormuz is often described as a choke point, but that word is too technical to capture the emotion of the place. It is a throat, a hinge, a pressure valve, a nervous system. When traffic flows normally, the world barely notices. When tension rises, traders, governments, ship insurers, militaries, and ordinary families feel the pulse. This documentary follows the narrow sea that powers the world's economy. But to understand Hormuz, we must also understand the larger planet. It belongs to the melting Arctic, the volcanic Pacific, the memory-filled Atlantic, and the abyss of the Mariana Trench. These are not separate stories. They are chapters of one system: water, energy, life, danger, and the human future moving through the blue machinery of Earth. The Strait of Hormuz lies between the northern coast of Oman and the southern coast of Iran, linking the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. On a map, it appears as a thin opening. In reality, it is one of the most economically important stretches of water on the planet. The surrounding region contains some of the world's largest oil and gas reserves, and much of that energy must pass through this narrow exit before it can reach the world. The passage is famous not because it is vast, but because it is limited. At its narrowest point, it is only a few dozen kilometers across. The actual shipping lanes are even more controlled inbound and outbound lanes, with a separation zone between them, guide enormous tankers through a space that seems small compared with their importance. Geography turns the sea into a funnel. Every day, tens of millions of barrels of petroleum liquids can move through Hormuz. The destinations read like a map of industrial civilization: China, Japan, South Korea, India, and other major economies whose energy systems still depend heavily on seaborne fuel. A ship leaving the Gulf is not just carrying cargo, it is carrying heat for factories, fuel for aircraft, feedstock for chemicals, and confidence for financial markets. This is why Hormuz is more than a regional waterway. It is a global instrument. A storm in most places is local weather. A crisis in Hormuz becomes a number on trading screens, a headline in ministries, a calculation in central banks, and a cost that eventually reaches the consumer. The strait is narrow, but the shadow it casts is enormous. To pass through Hormuz is to pass through the truth of modern energy. The world may be digital, but it is still carried by ships. The modern economy is built on motion. Oil must move from fields to ports, from ports to tankers, from tankers to refineries, and from refineries into the thousand forms of modern life. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the few places where that motion can be seen almost physically. A delay here is not merely a maritime event. It becomes a financial signal. Markets fear Hormuz because it concentrates risk. If a single pipeline fails, supply may be rerouted. If a port closes, cargo may shift to another terminal. But when a narrow maritime choke point carries a major share of global petroleum flow, the alternatives become limited. Some pipelines can bypass the strait, but their capacity is only a partial substitute. The world has workarounds, but it does not have a perfect replacement. That is why the idea of closure is so powerful. Even a short disruption can change expectations. Insurance premiums rise. Tanker owners reconsider voyages. Refineries worry about feedstock. Governments review strategic reserves. Traders price not only what has happened, but what could happen next. In energy markets, fear can travel faster than oil. The extreme scenarios are dramatic: a full blockade, mined waters, missile strikes, damaged tankers, or a military confrontation that makes commercial shipping too dangerous. But the more common danger may be uncertainty itself. When captains, insurers, and states cannot predict the risk, the cost of movement rises. The sea still exists, but confidence narrows. Hormuz shows us that the global economy is not an abstract network floating above geography. It is vulnerable to depth, width, weather, coastlines, weapons, and human decisions. The price of energy is written not only in wells and markets, but in narrow passages of water. The power of Hormuz begins with its shape. The strait is not an open ocean where ships can scatter freely across a vast horizon. It is a constricted passage bordered by politically sensitive coastlines and watched by radar, patrol boats, aircraft, satellites, and naval commands. The physical narrowness creates strategic intensity. Everyone who moves through it is visible to someone. On the northern side, Iran's coastline gives it proximity and leverage. On the southern side, Oman and the United Arab Emirates sit near the lanes that carry energy outward. Beyond the strait, the Gulf holds ports, offshore platforms, terminals, and shipping routes that form a dense industrial seascape. The water is not empty blue space, it is infrastructure. The geography also favours asymmetric pressure. A large navy can dominate open water, but narrow seas complicate power. Small boats can move fast. Mines can threaten confidence without sinking a fleet. Anti-ship missiles can turn coastlines into danger zones. Drones can extend vision and reach. In such a place, the strongest actor is not always the only actor that matters. This does not mean closure is easy or cost-free. The strait is vital to many countries, including those inside the Gulf. Blocking it would also damage the blocker's own economic and diplomatic position. But the possibility of disruption is enough to give Hormuz its strategic weight. It is a place where threat and reality often overlap. The geography of pressure is simple. Compress enough energy, trade, military presence, and political mistrust into a narrow corridor, and the water itself becomes tense. The Strait of Hormuz is never truly asleep. Even at night, the watch continues. Tankers move slowly through the traffic separation scheme. Patrol craft monitor patterns. Aircraft cross the sky. Signals pass between bridge teams, port authorities, naval units, and command centres. What looks like darkness from the shore is alive with navigation, surveillance, and calculation. The United States maintains a major naval presence in the region, including forces associated with the Fifth Fleet, because freedom of navigation through these waters is treated as a strategic priority. Other regional and international forces also watch the area closely. Their mission is not only to respond to crisis, but to prevent crisis by making the cost of disruption visible. Yet the presence of warships creates its own atmosphere. The same water carries commercial energy and military signaling. A tanker captain must think about currents, draft, speed, and traffic, but also about radio warnings, exclusion zones, suspicious approaches, and the possibility that a political event far away may suddenly change the risk level of the voyage. This is the tension of Hormuz. The ordinary and the extraordinary occupy the same lane. A ship may be performing a routine commercial transit, yet it passes through one of the most militarized maritime spaces in the world. The crew may see sunrise over calm water, while analysts on shore interpret the same journey as part of a global security equation. The 24-hour watch exists because the world has learned that energy security is not automatic. It must be guarded, negotiated, insured, escorted, and constantly reassessed. In Hormuz, the calm surface is not proof of peace. It is proof of how much effort is required to keep the passage open. Behind the language of barrels, fleets, and markets are human coastlines. Fishing communities have lived with these waters for generations, long before satellite tracking and global oil benchmarks turned the strait into a strategic symbol. For them, Hormuz is not only a corridor of energy, it is a home, a workplace, a memory, and a source of identity. The sea provides fish, routes, weather signs, and stories. Small boats leave at dawn into waters shared with some of the largest commercial vessels on Earth. The contrast is stark, a wooden or fiberglass fishing boat crossing the wake of a tanker that carries more value than an entire coastal village may see in years. Globalization passes close enough to rock the hull. Environmental pressure adds another layer. Heavy shipping brings engine noise, emissions, risk of spills, ballast water concerns, and chronic disturbance. Coral reefs and coastal ecosystems can suffer from pollution, warming, dredging, anchoring, and industrial expansion. When fish decline, the effect is not only ecological, it reaches family income, food traditions, and the dignity of work. This is often missing from the geopolitical map. A choke point is not only a strategic object, it is also an inhabited seascape. The same water that moves energy to global markets must also support local life. The same headlines that discuss closure and conflict often overlook the quieter crisis of livelihoods under pressure. To understand Hormuz fully, we must look beyond the tanker lanes. We must see the people who live beside the throat of the world, hearing the engines day after day, watching the sea carry wealth past their shores while their own relationship with the water becomes more fragile. Imagine the strait closing, not forever, but long enough for the world to believe the closure might continue. The first shock would not wait for physical shortages. It would begin in expectation. Oil prices would jump as traders tried to measure risk. Shipping insurance would become more expensive. Some tankers would halt. Others would divert if possible. Governments would issue statements that attempt to calm markets while preparing emergency options. Within hours, the strait would become the center of the world's attention. Newsrooms would display maps, Analysts would calculate lost barrels per day. Central banks would worry about inflation. Airlines would watch fuel costs. Import-dependent countries would search for alternative supplies. Strategic petroleum reserves would become a topic of public conversation. A narrow sea would suddenly enter ordinary households through prices. The severity would depend on duration, scale, and military response. A symbolic disruption is different from a sustained blockade. A temporary attack is different from mined waters. But the vulnerability is real because the flow is so concentrated. Alternative pipelines and routes can help, but they cannot fully erase the importance of Hormuz. The world has buffers, not immunity. The deeper lesson is uncomfortable. Modern civilization often assumes continuity. Fuel arrives, ships arrive, prices fluctuate, but systems function. Hormuz reminds us that continuity is an achievement, not a natural law. It depends on diplomacy, deterrence, infrastructure, and the restraint of actors who may not trust one another. If the strait closed, the world would rediscover geography in the most expensive way possible. The story of Hormuz is the story of energy moving through a narrow passage. But the search for energy, trade routes, and strategic advantage also points north to another world of water and risk, the Arctic. If Hormuz is a throat, the Arctic is a frontier that is opening as it disappears. The Arctic feels like the opposite of the Gulf ice instead of heat, polar night instead of desert glare, silence instead of tanker traffic. Yet the two regions are connected by the same human hunger for access. As sea ice retreats, northern shipping routes become more imaginable, resource extraction becomes more tempting, and geopolitical interest intensifies. The melting of ice turns remoteness into opportunity, but also into danger. Here, ice is not simply frozen water. It is a living force in motion. It grows, cracks, ridges, drifts, melts, and reforms. It shapes animal migrations, human travel, ocean reflectivity, and atmospheric patterns. In winter, temperatures can fall to levels that make machinery brittle and exposed skin vulnerable within minutes. In summer, the surface can become a maze of melt ponds, fog, unstable flows, and darkening ocean. The Arctic is often called the last frontier, but that phrase can hide the fact that people already live there. Indigenous communities have built knowledge systems around ice, animals, seasons, and movement. When the ice changes, the change is not abstract. It alters hunting routes, food security, safety, language, memory, and identity. To move from Hormuz to the Arctic is to see a larger pattern. The world's most important waters are becoming more crowded, more valuable, and more unstable. After the first hours of a serious Hormuz disruption, the story would stop being only military. It would become economic weather, spreading into every market that depends on energy. Crude prices would not wait for physical shortages to appear. They would move on fear, probability, shipping risk, insurance cost, and the question that no trader can ignore: what if the passage stays unsafe? The most dramatic estimates imagine oil climbing toward levels that would feel unreal in ordinary times. A sharp move above $100 would be painful. A spike toward $200 would become a global emergency. Such a price would not only punish drivers at fuel stations, it would raise the cost of aviation, shipping, plastics, fertilizers, chemicals, electricity in oil-dependent systems, and the transport of food itself. Inflation would return through the side door. Central banks that believed they were fighting the last wave of price pressure would suddenly face a new one, driven by geopolitics. Poorer countries would feel it first because energy imports consume a larger share of national income. Airlines would cut margins or raise fares. Trucking companies would pass costs forward. Families would meet the strait not through maps, but through monthly bills. This is why Hormuz is so feared. It is not only the volume of oil that matters, it is the speed at which uncertainty becomes price. Modern markets are built to react instantly, but ships still move at the speed of steel across water. Between financial time and maritime time lies the danger zone where panic can grow faster than supply can adjust. Whenever Hormuz becomes tense, the world asks the same question: can the oil simply go another way? The answer is partly yes, but not enough to remove the danger. The Gulf region has pipelines, export terminals outside the strait, storage systems, and emergency options. Yet these alternatives were not built to replace the entire flow of Hormuz. They were built to reduce vulnerability, not erase it. Pipelines have fixed capacity. Ports have loading limits. Crude grades are not perfectly interchangeable. Refineries are designed for particular feedstocks, and changing supply can create technical and commercial problems. Even when a barrel can be rerouted, the reroute may be slower, more expensive, or dependent on infrastructure that is already heavily used. This is the hidden weakness of the energy system. It is not enough for oil to exist somewhere. It must be the right oil, in the right place, with the right transport, at the right time, under acceptable risk. Hormuz concentrates not only physical cargo, but timing. The world runs on schedules, and schedules do not tolerate sudden geography. Some countries maintain strategic petroleum reserves, but reserves are buffers, not permanent substitutes. They can calm markets, supply emergency needs, and buy time for diplomacy. But they cannot make a narrow strait irrelevant. They are like oxygen tanks carried by a diver, essential in crisis, but not the same as changing the ocean. The uncomfortable truth is that Hormuz remains powerful because the world has not fully built an energy system that can live without it. Every alternative route is important. None is a complete escape. Iran does not need to defeat a major navy in open battle to make Hormuz dangerous. That is the logic of asymmetric power. In a narrow maritime corridor, even smaller tools can create large consequences. Fast attack craft, coastal missiles, drones, naval mines, electronic surveillance, and the ability to harass or seize vessels all become instruments of pressure. A mine does not need to sink many ships to change behavior. The possibility of mines can slow traffic, force clearing operations, raise insurance costs, and create uncertainty about which waters are safe. A missile battery does not need to fire constantly to matter. Its presence changes calculations. Small boats do not need to control the whole strait. They only need to create enough risk to make commercial shipping hesitate. This is why Hormuz is a difficult security environment. It is not a simple contest of large ship against large ship. It is a layered field of coastlines, islands, radar, boats, aircraft, missiles, drones, mines, and political signaling. The water may be narrow, but the threat environment is deep. Iran's northern coastline gives proximity, Its military doctrine emphasizes tools that can complicate the movement of stronger adversaries. In a crisis, the question would not be only whether the strait can be reopened. The question would be how long it would take, at what cost, and whether commercial confidence could return quickly enough. Asymmetric advantage is powerful because it attacks certainty. The global economy does not require every ship to be destroyed before it becomes afraid. It only requires enough doubt to make movement expensive. On the other side of the equation is deterrence. The United States maintains a major naval presence in the region, including forces associated with the Fifth Fleet, because the open flow of energy and commerce through Hormuz is treated as a strategic necessity. The message is continuous, the passage is watched, and disruption will not be accepted quietly. Deterrence is not only about firepower, it is about communication, warships, patrol aircraft, surveillance systems, mine countermeasure vessels, allied cooperation, and exercises all tell commercial shipping and regional actors that the water is not abandoned. They create a security architecture designed to make interference costly and temporary. But deterrence is delicate. Too little presence can invite risk. Too much pressure can create miscalculation. A small incident at sea can escalate if commanders, pilots, crews, or political leaders interpret signals differently. In a narrow corridor, ships have less room, less time, and fewer margins for error. A dangerous approach, a warning shot, a drone intercept, or a mistaken identification can become a crisis before diplomats have a chance to slow it down. This is why Hormuz is watched so intensely even on quiet days. Peace here is not the absence of tension, it is the management of tension. The goal is not simply to win a conflict, but to prevent the need for one. Keeping the passage open requires constant discipline from every actor close enough to affect it. The architecture of deterrence is invisible when it works, but without it, the narrow sea would feel much narrower. The human story of Hormuz is not only on the coast, it is also on the bridge of the ships passing through. A tanker crew entering the strait carries responsibility that is both routine and extraordinary. The vessel must follow traffic rules, maintain speed, monitor other ships, communicate with authorities, avoid collision, and protect a cargo that may be worth tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. For the crew, global politics becomes practical. A headline can become a security advisory. A diplomatic threat can become a change in watch level. A suspicious small boat can turn a quiet transit into a tense hour. Mariners must interpret radar contacts, radio calls, visual signals, and instructions while keeping the ship steady in one of the most scrutinized waterways on Earth. Life aboard a tanker is already demanding. Long contracts, isolation, machine noise, heat, maintenance, and fatigue are part of the work. In Hormuz, another layer sits over everything. The knowledge that the ship is a symbol as well as a workplace. A tanker is not only a vessel, it is a target, an economic object, a legal space, and a moving piece in a geopolitical game. The world often speaks of barrels per day, but barrels do not move themselves. People move them. Engineers, deck officers, ratings, cooks, pilots, port workers, tug crews, inspectors, and agents all form the human machinery behind energy flow. Their labor becomes invisible when the system functions. Every smooth transit through Hormuz is a professional achievement hidden inside a statistic. One of the fastest ways Hormuz affects the world is through insurance. Ships do not move only because the sea is physically open. They move because owners, charterers, insurers, banks, and cargo buyers accept the risk. When the risk rises, the cost of accepting it rises too. War risk premiums can increase sharply during periods of tension. A voyage that looked profitable may suddenly become uncertain. Some owners may demand higher rates. Some may refuse to enter the area without protection or compensation. Cargo buyers may worry about delays. Banks may examine exposure. The invisible world of contracts can slow the visible movement of ships. This matters because modern trade is a chain of confidence. A tanker voyage involves financing, charter agreements, insurance cover, port scheduling, cargo documents, inspection, payment, and delivery timing. If confidence weakens at any point, the chain becomes more expensive. The oil may still exist, the ship may still be seaworthy, the route may still be technically open, but fear changes the price of using it. In extreme cases, the cost of risk can become a form of disruption, even without full closure. Hormuz can therefore be shaken by perception as much as by physical damage. Markets are not calm machines. They are human systems built from expectation, memory, and imagination. The narrow sea powers the world not only through fuel, but through trust. When trust thins, the whole system feels the draft. The environmental story of Hormuz unfolds more quietly than the military story, but it may last longer. Heavy maritime traffic brings engine noise, exhaust, bilge concerns, ballast water, anchoring pressure, and the constant risk of spills. A single accident involving oil or chemicals could damage shallow coastal ecosystems that are already stressed by heat, salinity, and industrial development. Coral reefs in the region live near the edge of what many corals can tolerate. They face warm water, coastal construction, pollution, and sediment. Shipping adds chronic pressure. Noise can disturb marine life. Propeller wash and anchoring can damage seabeds. Oil residues can harm fish eggs, larvae, seabirds, turtles, and shoreline habitats. Even when there is no spectacular spill, repeated low-level stress can weaken an ecosystem. The danger is that the world notices the strait only when geopolitics erupts. A tanker incident becomes breaking news. A missile threat becomes a headline. But reef decline, fish loss, and water quality change happen slowly enough to be ignored. For local communities, however, slow damage is still damage. A fishery does not have to collapse overnight to ruin a livelihood. It can decline year by year until the old life becomes impossible. Hormuz is often called a corridor of energy, but it is also a living sea. It contains habitats, migration routes, spawning grounds, and coastal relationships built over generations. The same water that carries oil outward must support life inward. A truly secure strait would not only be open to shipping, it would remain alive. For local fishermen, the Strait of Hormuz is not a concept in energy analysis. It is the water they know by wind, colour, season, and memory. They read the sea in ways no satellite can fully replace, where currents shift, where fish gather, where storms form, where the morning light reveals a safe return. Yet their world now exists beside one of the richest flows of cargo on Earth. Giant tankers pass through waters that small boats have crossed for centuries. Industrial ports expand. Security zones shift. Military tension can suddenly limit movement. Pollution can reduce catch. Noise can change the behavior of marine life. A geopolitical crisis can make an ordinary fishing trip feel dangerous. The injustice is subtle, but real. The people who contribute least to the global energy system may bear some of its most direct local costs. They do not set oil prices. They do not design sanctions. They do not command fleets. But they may lose access to fishing grounds, face declining stocks, or watch younger generations leave the coast because the old work no longer provides enough. Their story complicates the image of Hormuz. The strait is not only a battlefield of states or a spreadsheet of barrels. It is a lived place. Children grow up beside it. Families eat from it. Elders remember when the water sounded different. The sea carries global wealth past local uncertainty. If the world depends on Hormuz, it also has a responsibility to the people who live with its consequences every day. Hormuz is becoming more important, not less, because the world is entering a period of overlapping transitions. Energy demand remains high. The shift toward renewables is real, but uneven. Oil and gas still move the machinery of transportation, petrochemicals, aviation, shipping, and many national budgets. At the same time, geopolitical rivalry is intensifying, and maritime security is becoming more complicated. This creates a hot zone where old energy meets new uncertainty. Sanctions, regional conflicts, drone warfare, cyber risks, missile technology, and competition among great powers all interact with the daily movement of tankers. A crisis does not have to begin in the strait to affect the strait. It can begin in a diplomatic breakdown, a proxy conflict, a strike elsewhere in the region, or a misread signal between forces already on edge. The danger is cumulative. Each incident adds memory. Each seizure, attack, warning, escort mission, or military exercise becomes part of the mental map used by governments and companies. Over time, the strait becomes not only a physical route, but a narrative of risk. Once that narrative hardens, even calm days can feel temporary. This is why Hormuz is a perfect subject for a documentary about the modern world. It contains energy dependence, climate contradiction, military deterrence, local livelihoods, environmental stress, and the fragility of globalization. It is narrow enough to film as a place, but wide enough to explain an era. Hormuz is not yesterday's oil story. It is one of today's hottest pressure points. The most frightening scenario is not an endless blockade imagined like a movie siege. It is the first 48 hours. That is the window in which uncertainty becomes contagious. No one yet knows whether the disruption is limited or expanding. No one knows whether diplomacy will work. No one knows whether mines are present, whether another ship will be hit, or whether insurance will remain available. In those first hours, decisions multiply. Tanker captains ask whether to proceed or wait. Companies ask whether to reroute cargo. Governments ask whether to release reserves. Militaries ask whether to escort, clear, warn, strike, or hold position. Traders ask how much risk to price in. News audiences ask whether this is the beginning of something larger. The first 48 hours matter because modern systems are psychologically fast, and physically slow. A market can panic in minutes. A tanker cannot be replaced in minutes. A pipeline cannot be expanded in minutes. A minefield cannot be cleared in minutes. A diplomatic channel cannot rebuild trust in minutes. The mismatch creates danger. If prices surged violently, the effect would not remain in energy markets. It would reach currencies, stock markets, bond yields, airline shares, shipping rates, inflation expectations, and political pressure inside importing countries. Leaders would be judged not only on strategy, but on whether ordinary people believed fuel and prices were under control. Hormuz is feared because it can compress global anxiety into 2 days. The clock would start before the smoke cleared. It is tempting to reduce Hormuz to oil. The numbers are dramatic, and the economics are undeniable. But the strait cannot be understood by oil alone. Its importance comes from the way oil connects to everything else: food prices, military alliances, local ecology, shipping law, national pride, public fear, and the credibility of states. A barrel passing through Hormuz is a physical object, but it is also a political signal. It may represent revenue for one government, dependence for another, leverage for a third, and vulnerability for a fourth. It may be insured in one country, financed through another, refined in another, and consumed somewhere far away by people who never learn its path. This complexity is what makes the strait so powerful. A local incident becomes global because the cargo is already embedded in global systems. A military threat becomes economic because ships carry priced commodities. An environmental accident becomes social because fishermen and coastal families depend on the same water. A diplomatic statement becomes financial because markets try to predict what it means for supply. Hormuz is therefore not simply a place where oil travels. It is a place where the hidden structure of modern life becomes visible. The world sees how much it depends on movement, confidence, and fragile agreements between rivals. The strait teaches a hard lesson. The energy system is not just technical, it is human, political, ecological, and emotional. Hormuz is not the only choke point in the world, but it may be the most revealing. It shows how civilization builds enormous systems around narrow openings. Canals, straits, pipelines, ports, data cables, shipping lanes, and power grids all create efficiency. They also create vulnerability. The more optimized the system becomes, the more painful a disruption can be. The future will test whether countries can reduce this vulnerability without creating new ones. Diversifying energy sources can reduce dependence on oil flows. Expanding renewables can change strategic calculations, improving storage, efficiency, and grid resilience can soften shocks. Protecting shipping lanes, managing conflict, and building emergency capacity can reduce immediate danger. But no solution is simple, and every transition has its own bottlenecks. A world moving toward cleaner energy may still depend on minerals, batteries, cables, semiconductor supply chains, and rare transport corridors. Choke points do not disappear, they change shape. Hormuz is a warning from the oil age to the next age. Do not confuse efficiency with security. Do not build a world that can be shaken by a single narrow passage. The strait will remain important for years because the existing system is enormous. But its greatest value may be as a teacher. It reveals the cost of concentrated dependence before the next crisis forces the lesson. A resilient future will be measured not only by how much energy the world produces, but by how safely and fairly that energy can move. Return to Hormuz at night. The water is dark, and the ships are points of light moving with disciplined slowness through a corridor watched by states, markets, sailors, fishermen, and satellites. Each tanker looks small against the sea, but the world inside it is enormous. Fuel, revenue, inflation, diplomacy, risk, and daily life travel together in steel. This is why the Strait of Hormuz fascinates and frightens the world. It is not dramatic because it is large. It is dramatic because it is narrow. It proves that the fate of global systems can pass through a space small enough to be threatened by mines, missiles, miscalculation, or fear. It proves that modern power still depends on geography. The strait is also a moral landscape. The same water that carries wealth can carry pollution. The same route that sustains distant economies can strain local fishermen. The same military presence that protects shipping can make the horizon feel tense. The same energy that powers modern life can deepen the climate challenge that will reshape coastlines everywhere. Hormuz is not only a passage between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean. It is a passage between old assumptions and new realities. It asks whether the world can remain dependent on fragile routes and still call itself secure. It asks whether economic growth can ignore ecological cost. It asks whether deterrence can prevent conflict forever, or whether diplomacy must do more than wait for the next alarm. The narrow sea that powers the world's economy is therefore not a remote place. It is a mirror. In its waters, we see a civilization brilliant enough to move energy across the planet, yet vulnerable enough to tremble when one corridor is threatened. As long as the tankers move, the world breathes through Hormuz. But every breath carries a question. What would it take to build a world that no longer holds itself by the throat?